academic perspective. Here's some sources for you to go look
Oh,
to
that's
get some
great.
good data.
That's really good.
And I'll talk a little bit about our philosophy on data collection. That's it.
Yeah, that's perfect. I kind of did the same thing, like kept it broad, but then I'm going to talk about from our kind of the organizational standpoint of like collecting our client data.
Yeah.
So kind of we like to use other people's data, but it's mainly like our original, like client loan level data. So I'll talk about that a little bit, and then we're in the middle of it, building a data warehouse.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Very overwhelming.
No, I know.
I have no lessons learned so far. We're just in the middle of it.
Yeah, I've been on that side.
Oh, yeah?
Many times I worked at DePaul University for a few years, and they
Okay.
went from kind of a COBOL, old, spreadsheets all over campus
Yep.
to an enterprise system that
Okay.
just took us forever to build. And the real issue with the data warehouse was everyone called everything the same. It's like, how do we get some data standards to,
Oh, yeah.
what's a student?
Yeah.
Like, this is a student to us. What's a student to you?
Yeah,
So,
exactly. All those questions
Yeah.
that actually, when you start talking about it, it's like, whoa, there's a lot to digest. Things like that seem like it would be straightforward.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
you wanna
Want to get started?
keep going? Okay, so this is. Say what? Yeah, we're gonna go.
Okay.
I'm gonna deliver this to the next room, but let's get going on our session about
Okay.
collecting data.
You got it.
Lance?
I think I'm going to stand. Are you going to stand or sit?
I don't know. I'll follow your lead.
All right, good. Is that on camera? Oh, yeah. Okay. So, hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us at 11 o'clock. It's like, I think it's one of the last sessions of the day before we head into lunch. So, glad to see you all here. We're here talking about collecting data, and I'll do my introduction. My name is Lance Kennedy Phillips. I'm the Associate Vice Provost for Institutional Research at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that means from my perspective during my presentation, but I thought my colleague could do her introduction too.
Hi, I'm Ann Cole. I work in a department called Innovation, Evaluation, and Public Policy at Neighborhood Housing Services of Chicago. And I can give you a little more background on that after Lance speaks.
All right, and then Dan has also joined us for this session, and he, I think, is introducing another session. We'll be back soon. So we're talking about collecting data. We wanted, when they approached us about doing this session, they wanted to make sure we made it interactive. So we have a few slides to show you, just to give an overview of some of the things we're doing in our sphere of influence, but we really want to have your questions, because collecting data is very important to making those key decisions that you want to make within your organization and using that good data to help serve your population. So for me, here's what I'm going to talk about really briefly. So I want to give you kind of an overview of institutional research at UIC and kind of talk to you about that. But I really want to focus on, for my section, looking at secondary sources of data. And my lens is higher education. So I'm going to focus on secondary sources of higher education data at 3 levels. One, the local level, information that you can find on any institution, usually on their website. And I'm going to focus on 2 pieces here, the common data set and what we also call the voluntary system of accountability. Second, I want to look at statewide higher education data. I know we had some folks here talking about regional portals and statewide data yesterday. I'm just going to focus on the Illinois Board of Higher Education portal and then give you kind of an overview of what's called the ILDS, or the Illinois Longitudinal Data System, which is something that's kind of new. That I think is going to be really interesting for us to talk about, and I think will be very helpful in the work that you're doing. And then finally, the big 500-pound gorilla in our world is the National Center for Education Statistics, particularly through what we call iPads. So I'm going to talk to you about those 2 pieces and how that can be some good secondary sources of data as you think about collecting data to help answer questions for you in your area, hopefully as they pertain to higher education. How many of you know about the field of institutional research? How many of you heard of that? A little bit? A little bit? So we've been around for almost since higher education's been around. Since legislators have asked questions about how you're spending our money, where are students, how many students do you have, how are they graduating, you've had an IR director that would probably provide that information. So the foundation of our field was in the actual external reporting, all the federal reporting, state reporting, anything you want to know about an institution usually came out of the Office of Institutional Research. As we begin to evolve as a field, we've started getting more into applied research, which is a lot of what we do at UIC, where we now develop our own instruments for collecting data. We do more predictive analytics for our data collection, more advanced statistics. Instead of just looking at, we have a 66% graduation rate for our Hispanic students, we're actually now asking the question, what do we do to get that graduation rate up to 75%? Lance, what kind of data can your team provide for us to help us provide services and programs that can help move the graduation and retention rate for our students. So you're seeing our field get more into what we call policy analysis and developing policies and helping our decision makers make good decisions. When we think about data at UIC and my team, and we really sat down and talked about this because we've been very excited about this, about being a part of this conference. I have an analyst here who's really getting a good feel of how we're looking at data within this community. We started talking about, well, Lance, and my team was like, Lance, data is really information. We have a lot of databases, we have a lot of information that's available, but it's not really useful until someone restructures that data and makes it good information into useful facts that can be made for decision making. When we think about it in our world, there are really three key players as far as data and data collection at UIC. There's the custodian, the producer, and the user. The custodian they're the folks who kind of maintain, they're our IT professionals. They're maintaining our databases, they're maintaining our enterprise systems, which is basically where we collect our information on students. You think about what grade students are getting in class, how students are enrolled, their financial aid information, their course information, their demographic information. All that information is collected at the custodian level and then stored in most of our databases. We have many data warehouses across campus that store information on students, not just students, but also our human resources professionals at high levels. So once the data is collected and the data on the students is being useful, we take the data as producers and restructure that into the facts that people use. So my job is to have our team collect data out of our data warehouse, get data that's stored in our data warehouse, and turn it into the facts that we're using, just like I gave the example before. Our custodians are actually collecting the data on graduation rates, where the students are still enrolled, what courses they're taking. I take that data and produce the graduation and retention rates, and I report that information to our users and decision makers. It used to be that we just reported, here's your retention, here's your graduation rate, this is how many students are enrolled. Now our reports are more about how do we give you good data that can influence your decision making on the types of programs and services you offer to make sure that we're providing the best opportunities for students to be successful. And that information is going to our users or our decision makers. Bringing those things together is what we call quality decision making, at least at a higher ed institutional level. One of the reports that we produced down there in that piece of the circle right here is called the Common Data Set. How many of you are familiar with the U.S. News and World Report? The best colleges,
that guy.
Peterson's Guide to Colleges. Anyone who's looking to go to college, they usually get some kind of data on various institutions and colleges around their area or nationally. All that information can be found on most higher education websites. It's called the Common Data Set. What happened back in the 90s was that, Peterson's and U.S. News would send surveys to colleges saying, hey, can you give us information about your institution? And we started getting the same information, the same questions from different people. So we got together and said, hey, here's what we'll do. We'll create a common data set, put that out on our website, and then you can go to that data set and get any information you want about the institution. While it was very important for the publishers, it actually became great information for the community. So now if you want to know anything about any institution, you can actually go to the common data set on the website and find out information like graduation and retention statistics, admission criteria, academic offerings, instructional class size, even things about basic student life and financial aid you can find in this data set on any college campus that maintains this information. Another good source that's at the local level, at the college level, is what we call the Voluntary System of Accountability. How many of you know who Margaret Spellings is? I'll ask it a different way. How many of you are familiar with No Child Left Behind? Okay. Margaret Spellings is the architect behind that, and she was the director of education in Texas, or the Commission on Education in Texas. So when the governor of Texas became the president of the United States, Margaret Spellings became the Secretary of Education. When she got that position, she started saying things like, I don't see good data from higher education. We can't make good decisions because I'm not getting good information. I don't know if our students are being successful. Higher education got very scared and we got very nervous. So what happened was that institutions around the country got together and said, whoa, slow down, we got this. we'll create the voluntary system of accountability. And as they even say on their website, which you can go to voluntarysystem.org, it's a collective voluntary response to the contention from government officials that a lack of useful data hinders policymakers, students, and the public from making informed decisions. We tried, and it was very successful, and we didn't go to No Child Left Behind the college years, so we did pretty good at stopping it. And what you're seeing on college campuses now, the outgrowth from the VSA is what's called the college portrait. Institutions voluntarily put data and information on their website to help consumers make good information, make good decisions about which colleges they're choosing. A key one is one that we didn't see a lot with the Common Data Set or with iPads, which I'll talk about later. It's the net cost calculator. Because back then we talked a lot about the student loan crisis in higher ed. So what institutions got together and said was, hey, we'll tell up front how much the education will cost, how much it will cost a student to attend this institution. So part of the VSA is the creation of what's called the net cost calculator. There's also information about, again, graduation retention rates, student success rates. Something that's a little bit different on the college portrait is student experience and perceptions. There's a series of surveys that they send out to students to get their perceptions of the university. So if you're a consumer, you can actually see what students think about student life. Do students feel like they're engaged with faculty members? Do students feel safe on campus? All that information is available on the college websites across the country. And then finally, they talk about student learning outcomes. Again, there are a series of surveys that the universities voluntarily give to their students to look at critical thinking skills, critical analysis skills, writing skills, and then other basic outcomes like graduation and retention and career success statistics. I say all this because I think these are good areas. If you're thinking about secondary sources of data on higher education, you can go to these sites and find this information on any student population that you're working with. Now let's say you want to not just go to a local institution, but you want to look at schools across the state of Illinois. You can go to what's called the Illinois Board of Higher Education. They're kind of the repository for all data on institutions of higher education in Illinois. Great information, great sources of data, but just to give you a brief overview, they have a data book where you can do dynamic searches across institutions and comparisons across institutions within the state. You can do cost studies of how much it's going to cost to attend a particular institution. They can give you degrees that are awarded by program, by institution. You can definitely get institutional profiles about the institution, where it's located, and the student demographics of the institution. Again, when you're thinking about some of the populations I've heard throughout the last 2 days that we're serving, this could be great information when we're trying to encourage students to move on to higher education. When we're trying to encourage students to find career opportunities through education. These would be great sites for you as you're feeding that information to them. On a national, there's one more thing to talk about from the state level, and this is something that's interesting because yesterday I sat in a session, I'm trying to think of it. It was with the Little Village, and they were doing they were targeting support for students or for young people in the Little Village. What they did was they used data to say, okay, we see a lot of support for students that are pre-K and elementary. We're seeing a lot of support for students that are in higher education. Students that are going through high school, but we find a gap for 5th through 8th graders, and that's where they targeted their information. Looking at that as an example, the state of Illinois is actually trying to do something similar. What we now have is what we're calling the Illinois Longitudinal Data System, and it's really looking at, I think I've heard people say the term, from cradle to career, our students. So the state of Illinois is collecting data from pre-K through higher education and even career workforce data to look at the flow of our students. And right now, I think this process is into about a second or third year, so the data are not available, but they will be available soon for your consumption. And I think it's going to help you as you're thinking about data collection for your areas, where you can target some of your efforts and some of your work as we start to see where some of the gaps are with our students. So it's it's actually a legislatively mandated program that's happening, but it's also not just something that's happening in Illinois. So it's not something that if it doesn't work here, it won't work. It's actually a federal process where there are grants for over 41 states that are actually doing similar types of data systems. A little background is that the federal government actually wanted to do this, but the states realized that we should probably take over this first and do it. So that's why you have at least 41 states that are voluntarily looking at their data at the student record level. as I start to wrap up, the real big source of data for higher education is the National Center for Education Statistics, or NCES. And it's not just higher education data. NCS is all education data that's available. Their primary, it's run by U.S. Department of Education. It's actually maintained by a nonprofit called the Institute of Education Sciences. Their key resource is what's called the Digest of Educational Statistics. It's a book about this thick with tables and things. And it's a lot of information to digest. Hence, digest. It's a lot of information for you to try to make sense of. It's just a lot of tables with tons of information. But what they said was, okay, this is getting a little bit much. What we're going to do is create a more narrative report, which is the conditions of education in 2013. And that looks at, more narratively, what are some of the outcomes of education? How is the data informing educational policy across the nation? This is a great source I think you should just have available if you're looking for ways of informing your data collection when it comes to education. The NCES Digest is available, and I think it's a good resource for you. But if you just want more of a narrative overview of what the state of education is in the U.S., the conditions of education is very important. And if you're a data geek, like myself, and you really want to get into the data, you can go to what's called IPEDS, or the Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System. All the information I've talked about so far, those graduation rates, those retention rates, the financial aid data, even how many faculty members are teaching, student-faculty ratios, all that's available to the public that you can look at dynamically, and you can search it, you can analyze it, you can download raw data from IPEDS, the federal website. And the reason this is such a powerful database is because all institutions in higher education have to submit data to it. If you're receiving federal financial aid, you have to submit your IPEDS data on an annual cycle. So it's really great information for profit, not-for-profit, private institutions, public institutions. They all have to submit their data here, and it's a great source of information that can be very helpful as you're thinking about a secondary source of data for your data collection. And again, what type of data are available on IPEDS? Again, enrollment statistics, financial aid statistics, degrees conferred, persistence rates, and like I said, information about faculty and staff members from a human resources perspective. I'm going to start wrapping up my time just talking about a few other sources of data. We talked about, I've heard a few times about how do we share data. Within higher education, I think we have a lot of good models on how we're sharing data across institutions. I do believe the accountability movement in higher education really forced us to start making sure we share data. A couple of good examples would be the Association of American Universities Data Exchange, and also the Council of Independent Colleges. These two data exchanges are basically where you can go and look at someone else's data. And I think institutions are getting involved in this because we're all answering the same questions. So we want to see what our colleagues are doing across the nation and in like institutions. So these are two sources of consortia and associations that look and collect data and exchange data. I talked about the accountability tools, that's the VSA. The UCAN, which is the University and College Accountability Network, is the private institution's version of the VSA. And then there are actually just a few more consortia, one on just looking at retention data by institution, and then CERP, which is the Cooperative Institutional Research Program, is just another source of data looking at entering characteristics of students. So that's my take on secondary sources of data as you think about data collection. I'll take questions. Yes?
So years and years ago, I really wanted to do a project on rape statistics on college campuses.
Yes.
And like there are maybe 2 questions that I could find, and it was like in these Excel sheets by institution. Is that better now?
Yes, Clery Act data is available and searchable. I'd have to get the exact site for you, but all institutions now have to report those type of statistics to the federal government, and it would be because of the Clery Act. We call it Clery Act collection. I'll get the source for you where you can find that information. It's a lot more robust. And talking about sexual misconduct and sexual violence, you guys know that there's a push from the government for us to do more data collection around that. Now all institutions will have to do a survey of their students looking at the climate for sexual assault, sexual violence, and still reporting those statistics to the federal government. Again, information that will be available.
Will it be a standard tool for across the nation?
That's the issue right now. The federal government put out hey, you can do it like this. It's up to you. So some of these consortia are getting together saying, let's do a like instrument. Look at the federal government's model, but let's see if we can at least try to have a consistent instrument. And the researchers in this field are all up in arms because they feel like a bunch of IR directors are getting together talking about subjects that they don't know anything about, which is true.
Yeah.
So that's why. So there is a push for us to try to get some standardization there, but it's coming. Yes.
Does this include community colleges as well?
Yes, it will include community colleges as well.
Okay, awesome. And then maybe part two is internship and sort of work experience while students are actually going through the education process. Is that being tracked? So internships.
Oh yeah, internships, not consistently. I think that's part of, so like for Illinois, I can get workforce data and I can use other identifiers to track that. I think we were talking yesterday about how we want to connect data.
Yeah.
I think that's some of the data we're not really collecting and connecting as we should. So no, it's not as consistent.
So not right now?
Not right now.
Okay, got
I
it.
think more perception-wise, but nothing real concrete. Yes.
I'm wondering if you've dealt with such an elaborate system of where all the data is coming from. Have there been any challenges or any strategies for dealing with the accuracy of data, or how do you?
Yeah, iPads. Well, it's a big source. You're always finding data errors because institutions can interpret how they report. So iPads will put out their data standards, but then the institution has the right to interpret how they want to report that. So they may say, iPads will say, how many students do you have? We may want to define students as part-time and full-time. Some people may want to define students as just full-time. So I think that's where there are still some data error issues there, but it's a system that we have available. So, but yeah, we do find that quite a bit. So it's just really what we usually do is I have my team look at longitudinal data, and I try to look for where the blips are, where we may find some differences, up 5 or down 10%, and that'll start telling me if there's a data collection issue or measurement error. So those are the things we try to do. And also I try to compare them to like institutions. So if I'm seeing UIC as an urban research institution, I'll usually compare my data to like a Wayne State or UC Irvine that's a similar type of institution, just kind of seeing if there's some significant differences in the data that we should be calling our attention to. That's my time. Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
Right,
No, yeah, please.
So you slipped in a slide where you're like, oh, and if you need private schools, here's this website.
Yes.
And just in your experience, is there a tension between data about public institutions and access to data about private institutions? Like, do you think there's something
No, I
really
think
different there, or is it just, it's hard to get data sets comparing those two?
it is. This one, the Association of American Universities Data Exchange, is public and private. This is probably the best one. I think the UCAN came about because we were getting pressure from our legislators to do this because of the state funding. They weren't really getting that pressure, but they still felt like they needed to respond to it. So I think that's why this group started, and then this group came up afterwards. Usually, yeah, if it's more like institutions, for example, I talk about our peer group. Temple's a part of our peer group because they're an urban research institution, but they're private. They'll usually share their data with us as long as we share our data with them. Thanks for your time, guys. Thank you.
Sorry. Oh, sure.
I don't see it.
Let's see, maybe. Oh, there we go. Great. Thank you. Let's see here. How do I do this here? Okay, great. So thank you, everyone. Again, I'm Ann Cole, and I work with Neighborhood Housing Services of Chicago. I work in a department called Innovation, Evaluation, and Public Policy. So a lot of what we do might be kind of similar in goals to what Lance was talking about, using our data and coming up with looking at trends and trying to make good business decisions based off that data. But obviously I am going to be talking about it on a much different scale, on a smaller scale, more from the program and practitioner side of how our nonprofit uses our own data, how we collect it, some of the issues we run into with collecting that data, and ultimately how we strive to use that information. So just as a little bit of a background, I'll give you an overview of NHS. We're a nearly 40-year-old organization working in Chicago, and our mission is to help people live in affordable homes, to improve their lives and to strengthen their neighborhoods. And we do that through a variety of different program areas. We provide homebuyer education and counseling to low and moderate income households. We specifically target those services in neighborhoods in Chicago, but we work throughout the region. We also spend a lot of our time on foreclosure prevention services, counseling, and negotiating with banks for different resolutions for homeowners at risk of foreclosure. We also have an affiliated entity who's a licensed nonprofit mortgage lender in the state of Illinois. So we provide funds to help people buy, fix, and keep their homes through purchase rehab, home improvement, refinance loans. We also administer a number of different grant programs for the city of Chicago, the county, different layers of financing to help people purchase their homes and keep them. We also have another entity that focuses on kind of the bricks and mortar work of our community development work through property redevelopment. We serve as a receiver for the city of Chicago for troubled buildings to address those vacant properties or properties that are at risk of being vacant because they're abandoned. And then we also, through our neighborhood offices, do a lot of work on community building and resident engagement through our neighborhood strategy department. And that's where we have our 6 different neighborhood offices located on the south and west sides of Chicago. And we also have 2 regional offices, one serving the Fox Valley and Kane County. And we recently opened an office in East Hazel Crest to serve the south suburban Cook County communities. So that's a little background about what we do. I was just going to talk a little bit today before kind of opening up for questions and hopefully hearing what you all are doing as well. I wanted to talk a little bit about our approach to collecting data and some of the challenges and some of the benefits that we see of collecting our information, and then talk specifically about one project we're working on, which is developing a data warehouse to try and wrangle all this information that we gather on a daily and a monthly basis. So obviously, on the program and practitioner side, I'm going to be talking mostly about our primary data that we're collecting. The main sources that we use focus on both the client level side and also the loan level data. So we collect lots of different information points from every person that comes through our office. Last year, we served about 6,000 people, and we have a lot of different funder requirements, so this gets to be a whole lot of data that we see flowing through our doors every day. On the client side, we focus a lot on your basic demographics. It kind of depends on whether or not they're coming in for pre-purchase, on the pre-purchase side or on the foreclosure prevention side. That kind of determines what type of information we need from them in order to assist them. And then we have a separate system to focus on the loan level data. Since we are also a licensed mortgage lender, we kind of collect information similar to that any bank would. Another important source of information that we use are client surveys to kind of collect some of that more nuanced information that doesn't fit into a demographic survey. Although we do collect those on some of our client surveys of people attending our workshops or receiving counseling through our offices. We try and engage some of the motivations and attitudes towards home ownership to see if we can spot any interesting things that are going on in our neighborhoods and try and drill down to kind of how those attitudes are changing over time. And we also do a follow-up survey online if people received our services, just to see kind of what happened after they received our services. If they purchased a home, if not, why didn't they purchase a home? That's kind of has its own set of challenges of kind of keeping in touch with clients over time, which I can touch on as well a little bit later. And then we do have multiple uses for the information. If there are other people in the room that also work at nonprofits, you know, one of your main drivers is funder and contract reporting, which can be, it's very important. Your funding depends on it, but can also be quite an administrative burden. So we try and focus also on other uses for that information, such as public policy and government outreach, kind of using our information. How can we use this to educate our elected officials about what we're doing and what's happening in their areas? And we also really try and use our information to gauge progress towards meeting our mission, whether that's through kind of sharing data internally. We've started a process called our quarterly budget and goals meeting where we take all of our performance data that we kind of collect and analyze on a monthly basis, throw it up on the screen, and have all the program managers sit around. We have kind of a red, yellow, green ranking system of like, we're ahead in this area, we're behind on this area. Not necessarily to call people out or, have it be a negative experience, but really to say kind of how can we learn from where we're at, and do we need to make adjustments in our goals or our thinking this year. So kind of our approach. I wanted to talk just a little bit about one big project we're working on now, which is the development of our data warehouse. This has been kind of a project that has been years in the making. We were really looking for a solution to help us streamline our own data collection and analysis processes. At organization of our size, we're about 120 employees with all of our neighborhood offices. We have a lot of information, so we've gotten to a point where we're good at collecting it. We have an abundance of good and accurate data, but they are all in different areas, saved on many different platforms that do not speak to each other. So our goal was really to get to a place where all of our information can talk to each other, and then we can streamline and make more efficient our reporting for both our own understanding and then also for our reporting out to funders to try and ease some of that burden and staff time. So as you can see from this slide, I just tried to list out some of the different sources that we use. One of our main sources is our lending software and database. So that is a huge amount of information. Also, we have our another custom-built counseling database where we kind of keep the counseling information separate, which I was going to touch on a little bit later, being a challenge for us, since for legal and regulatory issues, we really have to keep that information separate. We also have a bunch of what I call our one-off kind of rogue access databases where people, it's not one program comes up and we need to start tracking it, and it's too cumbersome to make changes to an existing database, so let's just build an access database and collect that, and it kind of sits there by itself. We also have a lot of individual Excel files that live on people's computers, which I have been guilty of as well. And so we have to deal with those. And then also Word documents, PDF files, kind of every format you could think of. I should have added a bubble that just says people's brains, because that's a lot of information we have too. There's a lot of institutional knowledge that that sometimes we miss because it's not documented and captured somewhere. So our basic goal with this project was to transform kind of this huge amount of organizational data into useful information that'll really help inform our business decisions and hopefully ultimately kind of inform larger conversations in the housing and community development space. So being able to move beyond just our reporting of outputs and here's what we did every month to really start to be able to identify some trends and make some statements about what's happening in Chicago. So once this is completed, which we started over the summer, and we have a rollout of kind of the beta testing of our reports for this winter. But once it's completed, the goal is that we should be able to pull from all these existing sources of data and really be able to run these reports and have the information updated on a daily basis. So that should really cut down on a lot of staff time doing that. So the first step in this project, which we're just now wrapping up, so unfortunately I don't have necessarily a lot of best practices to share about this data warehouse, but it's more of a report of what we're doing kind of in progress. The first step, which has taken us the first couple of months, was to really inventory and align all of our data sources. One of the main reports we started to work on was a report we do to track our progress on our annual plan goals. So once we kind of, staff update it manually with numbers every month, and various staff are in charge of different program areas. But once we really sat down to inventory what effort went into that report, we identified over 30 different sources, many on different platforms that again, like I mentioned, don't speak to each other. We had SQL, Access, Excel, Word, our proprietary databases, and we also have some goals to include ArcGIS and other global sources to kind of layer on top of that to help us with some of our reporting at a geographical level. To kind of add a little bit of complication to that, we also collect data at a couple different dimensions. So we have our client level data dimension, we have our loan level data dimension, and then we also have property level information. So when we think about our different databases, it's not as clear as we're tracking one client over time. Sometimes there's not a client involved. Sometimes our client is a property or an address. So kind of trying to see how those will align. The main step in this process of aligning our data was to create our data dictionary. So this was hopefully will result in a single source of information that details all of our data fields and kind of compares apples to apples across all these different Excel spreadsheets and databases, kind of aligning those data fields. So if a property or a person's address is listed in this database, is it going to match up to this address in another database, or are we talking about different things? The next step in this, after we kind of align all of our data sources, is going to be developing the framework for different reports that we complete on a regular basis. And once this is established, we'll be able to pull these down, hopefully on a daily basis rather than once a month and kind of having a static document living on someone's computer. So just a couple issues we've run into so far that I would be interested to hear if other people have had experience with this or have ideas of how to address these. The one I mentioned before include the legal and regulatory issues. So because we have different business lines, as much as we want to consolidate our information across our entire organization, we're always going to have to keep these separate to some degree, just in terms of the lending information that we have and as well as the counseling information. Just by law, those have to remain separate. So the data warehouse is trying to address that by not combining the data, but really pulling from different sources. The second issue, and this was a question I had as kind of from more on the program side and not the IT side, was what is the true benefit of developing this data warehouse versus creating a whole new system for a custom database? That was kind of my question when we started this. If we have all these different sources of information, some of which are stored in not the best way, why don't we just kind of create our own custom system where we can input all this information? And the answer I got from our IT staff was actually made a lot of sense in that this is kind of the first step of inventorying everything that we have, and it's really a way of kind of meeting the program staff where they are, instead of building out a very expensive system that might be kind of cumbersome to update if we have new programs or contracts come up. This will allow us to be a little more nimble and a little more flexible by just pulling the information and not necessarily having a new source of data entry. So I thought this was a really good idea, and hopefully it will prove to be successful for us. Really allows us to, the IT and the developers who are working on this, to really understand the program side and the business workflow before they, kind of build out an entirely new custom database system. And then the third challenge so far, obviously, is just the staff time and resources. Being a nonprofit, we do value data, and we like to spend time analyzing it and looking at it, but it is not our primary business, and we do it for kind of a greater reason, so we can only spend so much time kind of working on issues like this. And I just wanted to touch on, to end before I pass it along to Dan, just as a reminder of why at NHS we think this is important. The development of the data warehouse has been like a very interesting project, and I think a lot of people at our group are interested in it, but we always have a kind of the greater reason in mind of why we're doing it. So I just wanted to share a couple ways in which we try and use our data, and hopefully this system will allow us to make bigger strides in answering these sort of questions. So one is just to inform public policy conversations, including the tightening credit availability in Chicago. So this was just one example of looking at our own lending, kind of layering it with existing conventional lending through HMDA data. And what it shows is basically something we kind of know in our gut all the time, is that we're lending in neighborhoods that other people are not. But to be able to show this and really see it in a graphic form is much more powerful when we talk to our banking partners and regulators and other stakeholders like that. Another way we want to be able to use our data and be able to use it better is to increase organizational understanding and guide program strategy. So this is just one example I pulled from one of our surveys that we administer to our clients, trying to get a gauge of what concerns people a lot when they buy their homes. We've been running this survey for a couple years now. So now we're able to say over a period of 4 years, you know, actually people are a little more concerned now about getting approved for mortgage financing, which was interesting to me. Could be due to a lot of the credit issues that people have experienced over the last couple years. People feel kind of a less uncertainty in the job market, which is a good thing, but maybe a little more concerned about home maintenance and repair. So we can take this information and then take it to our workshops to say, hey, maybe we should cover a little bit more about home maintenance in our workshops. And lastly, just another example of kind of guiding our program strategy. This information was also based off of another community impact survey we did in the Auburn Gresham neighborhood, one of our target neighborhoods. And it was a block by block client resident survey as well as a building kind of field survey. And so from that information, we built out a resident participation index and layered that with how many years an individual had lived in the neighborhood. So now we're able to look at that target area on a block by block basis and develop some strategies based on very specific information. If we found that the block has relatively low participation rates, and also most of the people there are pretty new residents, maybe we can think of some outreach strategies to meet those needs versus a block with really high engagement and people who have lived there for a long time could maybe use a different intervention. So those are just some ideas of how we currently use it, and hopefully we'll be able to even improve those analysis with our data warehouse. So this is my contact information. If anyone has questions about the actual data warehouse, I'd be happy to connect you with our IT folks. And I also just selfishly listed some questions that I'd love to hear from other people about any challenges that you have of managing multiple data sources, and if you found certain projects to be effective ways of using your data to inform business decisions. So I'm happy to answer questions or pass it along to Dan as well.
I want to know what's up with that too. Anybody got anything on this? Have you addressed challenges in multiple data? Yes, Dan.
I'm Dan Bassel, and when you talk about data warehousing, I understand this is kind of an open question. Do you consider links to other people's websites and web resources part of what's in your web house, or are you really thinking of data like heat maps of stuff?
Mm-hmm. So I think what you're talking about, linking to other sources would be wonderful, and I think we probably think of that as being maybe a second tier to our project. So I think first we really want to focus on getting our own information organized and really having an accurate picture of what we have and being able to pull up for our own reporting. And then as a second step, I think that would be a great, definitely on our wish list, to be able to connect to other data sources. If it's HMDA data, if it's foreclosure filing information, so if someone comes in looking for foreclosure prevention counseling, we can kind of see, if some people don't know if they've had a filing, so we can kind of look up these things and layer on other sources of information. So right now, no, but I think that would be a great thing to aim for. Mm-hmm.
Hi, so I'm grappling with a lot of this exact problem
Mm-hmm.
of having so many different databases, and it's fascinating because I'm part of a big organization, so
Mm-hmm.
we're part of the Alliance, so we're
Mm-hmm.
6 different companies within one umbrella.
Yeah.
And that this is making me think a lot about
Mm-hmm.
whether a data warehouse is the answer to our troubles with this exact problem. The one way that I'm going to be addressing part of that challenge is looking at our topic areas of data that we collect
Mhm.
and try to focus, and where you had your slide with all the levels of where your data
Mhm.
is, at least starting to, and I guess we're doing some of that, of attempting to get like data in the same system, so that I
Mhm.
don't have spreadsheets to consider, to include with data that I otherwise have in a database,
Mhm.
and try to funnel those staff to just put the same data into the same system, even if you're in different parts of our company. And I think I can focus right now on one company. I can't really deal
Yeah.
with the other companies yet. So I think we're on a long track of getting ourselves to a place where you guys maybe are already kind of
Mhm.
formulating that solution. But that's one way that I think we'll probably layer it, is to at least get like data in like places, and then it's fewer sources to integrate.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a good idea in thinking about it. Yeah, and like we were saying, in terms of how it's being collected, not necessarily on topic area, which is an interesting way to think about it. And that's part of the process here too, is like I said, the main goal is to just get the system in place so we can pull our reports. But as we're going along, if there are kind of adjustments we can make along the way to reduce some of those redundancies, we're doing them as we can, but I think a lot of that will kind of reveal itself through the whole reporting process of what's working, what's not. So hopefully we can do that.
Yeah, and what you described sounds like the gentlest process to impose on your staff.
That's a really good way of putting it, yeah.
What really stands out in my mind is the kindest thing you can do to even try to maintain retention of staff. Because you
That's a
burn
really
people
good point.
out,
Mhm.
and we do it all.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good way of putting it. I hadn't thought about it in that way, but I think you're absolutely right. And that's another thing I think a lot of people just in general have kind of fatigue, like data entry fatigue. And especially if they're not involved on the analysis and like the fun part of it, it's just like, okay, we have another system we have to use and learn and enter into. And so hopefully we can avoid this, and who knows, maybe down the line it'll make sense to have a whole new system. But yeah, kind of not being the least disruptive to program staff who actually need the time to do the work instead of the data entry is a goal.
I have sort of three questions that kind of, in my mind, blend together. One was, where was your IT staff? What programming languages? What SQL databases they were using? The second was then, how does this merge into your lender shopping?
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming you're an introducing broker, not an actual lender.
We are a lender. We have a loan pool.
You have a loan pool.
Mhm.
Cool.
Mhm.
And do you do lender shopping as well, or
I'm not sure what that means actually.
where you put all the data in for the qualification for the loans, and then you shop out to other lenders?
Oh, so we don't. We do all our lending in-house, and we have like a manual underwriting process. So that on the data side for our lending, it's basically all of the intake information, and then from there it's kind of a manual underwriting process. So we don't need to kind of push out that data to anyone else. And for your first question,
So then for your own system, do you have how does all this data integrate with that?
So yeah, so that is kind of one of the trickier things, and kind of connects to the regulatory issues of, because we are a lender, all that needs to be kept separate and confidential and secure and not touch our counseling data. So the hopes with the data warehouse is that it will be able to pull information and connect it to counseling data, but they're still stored completely differently. I don't know if that addresses your question.
It will. It may if you answer the question about what languages and SQL databases.
Okay, so I probably don't have the specific information is what you're looking for. I do know our IT staff is developing this using a SQL server, and that is the extent to what I know about the language. But I will say, as I was talking with a couple of people before this presentation, we have an in-house IT staff that's working on it, but we also have someone on a consultant contract basis who's really leading the process, and he really wanted me to mention if other people want me to get in touch with him, he's happy to do that, so I can get you his information. He'd be a lot more helpful on the technical side.
All right. Keep going.
So maybe if you as a front-end user, what are you using to build the reports from the SQL server?
That I probably don't know. Yeah, I would have to find that out for you.
Well, I guess my question is more like, how are you going to get the data out of the SQL server to you?
Like technically speaking, or
Yeah, like, are you going to get an Excel file that
Oh, like
combines
when
everything,
you-
and then what are you
Mhm.
using? Crystal Reports? Are you using
okay.
like?
So as of right now, I believe we're going to do Excel, and I think a lot of that is still up for negotiation, we're going to see kind of how it works and what is going to be most useful. But right now the plan is to be able to just pull down Excel. And then because hopefully we can do it in a way, they're going to, develop whatever custom reports people need. And if there's, hopefully going to be other funder systems where we can design an Excel sheet that will be able to like upload right into the funder system, that sort of thing. So.
There was a session yesterday, I didn't attend it, my analyst did, that talked about where open source software that you can do to pull those, that you can use to make reports. I think there's R's out there.
I was on that.
Oh yeah, so I think just saying that there's some information out there on like open source software that you can use to pull data down and to create reports too.
I do this for a living, so
Oh, okay,
I'm
you-
just curious.
For the rest of you, maybe some open source software.
How does one then move over to this? I wonder how
The big, to make it big for the whole
that
screen.
we get into, turn it into the
Oh.
phone the other day.
Oh, that's weird. Maybe you just have to
escape?
close mine out.
Yeah, I got
You are our tech wonder.
you. First, I gotta find the cursor.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so it's-
So how where are we at here? We have 19 minutes left.
Where you at?
Are we getting? Yeah, that's probably this guy instead of the desktop. Are you? Anybody have anything? Do you want to change what we're doing? Do you want to talk about something else? Are you getting what you need? What do you got? You're good? Yeah, there was some pretty crazy deep dives into two really intense systems that I had never known anything about, that higher education stuff. That's and it's interesting to hear the history of it and to drill down into one really particular implementation. All right, so I'm going to talk about some dumber things that are not as sophisticated, frankly, as that. I have a general theory, right? Let the data come to you. First, I just want to talk about, this is what we're going to do. Let's hear from you. Are you guys okay? So you want to talk about something else, or you want to keep talking about this? All right, we'll keep talking about this. Because why? Because it's our day. All right, when you're talking about Smart Chicago, let the game come to you. It's a series of files and tubes. So I always like to start with this, and it gets even probably tiresome for people who keep seeing it, but I never get tired of it because you have to always come back to what your principles are. At Smart Chicago Collaborative, we're about technology, open, everyone in Chicago. We're about technology. That's our frame. That's what we focus on. If it doesn't have anything to do with technology, we can't be of much use because we just don't really know anything else. We're open, and that's the only kind of data that I'm really versed in. I know that so many people, you were talking about, the privacy and keeping one database from another. I mean, that's really intense, and campus assault data, and I mean these are enormous issues. I don't really have any experience in that domain. I'm really into open data. But we're a small organization, and we can't. I loved what Terry said this morning. If you could do it by yourself, it's probably not worth doing. I thought that was amazing. So that's pretty much our game because we can't do anything by ourselves. Everyone in Chicago, we seek to be of use to everyone. We don't drill down into a particular neighborhood or a particular focus or a particular line of work. We try to focus on everybody, and we focus on Chicago. All right, so what I want to talk about, and I didn't realize until I put this together that it was Earl the Pearl Monroe who said this, but I thought it was Michael Jordan because he used to say it all the time. But I love this idea of let the game come to you. And it's Phil Jackson. It makes sense because Phil Jackson was on the team on the Knicks with this guy, and Phil Jackson was a big purveyor of this. He's got that Zen coaching attitude, and it's a philosophy that works. I think we spent a lot of time churning our legs looking to collect data from other places. We file FOIA requests, which I find a completely reasonable approach. We hammer institutions to try to get data out of them. Miriam, how much work do you do to try to get data out of people who don't want to give it to you? I have a different kind of, I like this Zen approach. I like the data come to me. Why? Because it's everywhere. It's everywhere. And if you just listen for it. Lots of times you could be asking for data, ask. Call the public information officer of a unit of government. File a FOIA request. And you know what? The data might be on a freaking spreadsheet on their website today. And you could be having enormous discussions and conversations about whether or not they should produce it and what fields it should be. It could already be out there. It may already be out there. And it's just happened to me many, many times. One example, I helped start a website called everyblock.com. And Everyblock is a neighborhood news and local information service. So you can get an RSS feed for your block. So there were 4 people who started Everyblock. I was the people person, because everybody else was technical and was able to do things, so they needed someone to talk to people. So I would ask people for data. So I did a lot of phone calls. I'd call up the mayor's office of Boston and say, hey, I wanted to get all your building permits. Oh, New York. New York's right here. I actually did this, right? So in 2007, I called the mayor of New York. And I said, yeah, can I talk to the mayor? And he was in a meeting, believe it or not. So then I was like, they were like, what do you want? And I said, well, I'd like a list of all the building permits in New York. And they were like, well, which one? And I said, well, all of them. And then they said, well, like what date? And I said, well, all of them. And, that didn't go well. So I just looked on the internet. And on the internet, they had this amazing system called the Building Information Search. It's an insane database. This was from, again, 2007, 2008. This absolutely uniformly wonderful database that has this lookup tool type thing. You could search by property, you could search by type of permit, you could search by all this stuff. So I stopped calling them, and I just looked at all this, and I figured out ways to search for all the data I wanted. And then I told the more technical people what steps I went through in order to get all that data that we wanted, so we could force those pages on the internet to appear in the browser window. And then they created scrapers to just take all the data out of the system. So I actually said I didn't stop asking them. I kept asking them in an email thread. This was one of my favorite things to do. I would have this email thread, hey, can I get this data? No response. Hey, can I get this data? No. Hey, can I get this data? What? Hey, and it would go on for a few months. And I'd just hit back in the exact same thread, like, oh yeah, we've started this site. And then I would link to the, nyc.everyblock.com/building-permits. And that would be the end of the thread. And you'd be like, here's all that stuff I was asking for. Not to be a jerk about it, but it was just, you gotta have fun, right? It's just, you gotta, when you're having your day, you should have fun. That was fun. And then they shut down the scraper. But and then it was the only instance in which they ever shut us down. Any city. We were in 16 cities. And I called them up and I said, yeah, so could you turn it back on? And they said, well, you're bringing our server to its knees. And I said, that's not true. Anyway, so it was there, is my point, right? It's there. We let it come to us. Here's another amazing instance. I love this URL. It's not a URL, of course. It's an FTP. Well, it is a URL, but it doesn't start with HTTP. It starts with FTP. We're probably all familiar with, if you deal with any data, the file transfer protocol, where you are able to just query another box. And I love thinking about, if you've ever had a chance to read a technical book, you should read the book called World Wide Web by the guy that invented it, Tim Berners-Lee. It's a stunning technical book that just tells his story of how he had literally invented the World Wide Web. And it still blows my mind that there's a human being, a single human being. Now, a lot of people made the internet, but a single human being invented the World Wide Web. And that person's still alive, and that person was able to tell us how that person did it. And it just gets you to the core. The web, the World Wide Web, is a series of files. That's all it is. It's a series of files on computers. And that is visible here. You remember that. You see that. This is a list of every crime record in the city of Dallas back to the year 2000. I found this in 2007. You know, the city of Chicago does a lot of squawking about how awesome their crime data is. And it's pretty good. This stuff is stunningly amazing. It goes back to, again, to 2000, and they did it with no fanfare, and it was impossible to find this. I found this using, and we can talk about that a little bit, advanced queries in Google, which is, amazing resource that is underutilized. But I found this, and I was like, oh, I guess I don't have to ask them for the data. And I literally had called the department, and they were like, oh, yeah, we'll work on that. They're like, oh, yeah, we'll give you the data. They didn't even tell me that this was there. This is what I mean with let the game come to you, okay? So these are stunning files. And when you download these files, you really should go to this URL. Because it's a really good exercise for non-technical people like me, and if you're non-technical, to get a feel for data. We have to use inclusive language, so I didn't have other examples. But one thing about this data that they don't have in Chicago is that they have a lot of the narrative detail. And if you ever have listened to police officers with the narrative detail of their interactions with the public, it can be colorful. So if you download a whole month's worth of reports and you search for particular strings of words and letters that are strung together, you'll find some colorful, offensive words. So I always like that because I like swearing. But this is here, unknown, that's just the thing they do. The unsuspect remove sprinkler heads from lawn without permission. I love that phrase, without permission. It's like, cop language is wonderful. Anyway, so this cop language is in here, and it gives you a feel for XML and how they structure the data. It's interesting. Another example, I found this database in, 2006 or something like that, and I was kind of fascinated by it. And actually yesterday someone was talking about, wait, it was just in the last session, budget. Someone was saying they'd love to get a feel for, they'd love to see the budget. Well, guess what? The city of Chicago has maintained this system. It's their FERP system. It's their enterprise payment system. And they have a lookup tool that it's easy to make fun of this lookup tool because it's kind of, it's not Google, right? And you have to have exact phrases and, but this is it. This is the real deal. It has every vendor, contract, and payment search. It has every payment. This is the check register. It's there. It's already out there. You can look for every check that is cut to every vendor. It has every subcontractor. It has the fully executed signed copies of every contract entered into by the city of Chicago with original signatures in blue ink by the mayor. Wow. It's a stunning database. And so what we did is my friend Harper Reed, I told him about it and he's like, wow, that's cool. So so we made this site. So anyway, he sucked all that out. So he ran a scraper against that, and we downloaded every contract. This was 2008, and it was right there. We didn't have to ask anybody. Again, this is what I'm collecting data. We didn't ask anybody permission for this. We didn't have to. And by the way, the thing is, this is an important thing when you're letting the game come to you. A lot of times we get stuck in our own minds, our own requirements. Well, I need this data to do this, this, or this. Instead, you should think about their minds. This has nothing to do with me. This is a lookup tool for contractors to determine if they were paid yet. This is like, what's the status of my payment? This was the software problem. This was the problem they had, and this software solves a different problem, achieves a different objective than I ever wanted in my life. But so instead of coming to them and saying, I want this, I want what I want, I looked and I said, what do they want? And I think of this all the time. It's like It's a Wonderful Life. You remember this, right? The bank run scene? and they're about to go on their honeymoon, but there's a bank run, and you know she's like, come on, we have this money we're going to use for our honeymoon, and then they're like, well, I want all my money. And then he's like, but what do you really need? And she's like, well, I have everything I have here. I have, this, $26.14. He goes, well, what do you need? And she's like, well, $2 will be fine. And he gives her a kiss, and he gives her the $2. This is the $2 right here, right? I didn't need everything. I just needed these $2. So we made this city payment site. We sucked it all out, and then we created this little thing where you could flag anything as goofy. If you thought something was goofy, right? A contract or a payment, you can flag it as goofy. So we had some instances of that. There goes a $2 million contract that someone thought was goofy. So we got some interesting comments on that. So I just wanted to say one more thing about Google. Who here uses Google Advanced Search? Did you ever click on that? Google Advanced Search. It's amazing. I love it so much. You can search by operator. You could search by PDF, by Excel spreadsheet. Searching by XLS on a city website will yield a lot. Just literally doing XLS space URL of city website. You will see every Excel spreadsheet that's published to that website. You could do XLS subject name or what I'm interested in, and then see that. Google Advanced Search is really awesome, and you can search for particular terms inside websites, but format is really good. That's pretty much what I had. Like, does anybody else have any collection methods that you're into? What you got?
I've been using concept maps to map the people I meet at events like this to show the different relationships and such with each other.
Interesting.
I posted one of those on the Twitter chat because if there's some people interested in creating a map of this event, it would be like layers. If you think about a hub and spoke, the hub at the top level is the event. The spokes would go out to categories: poverty, housing, health. There's the complexity is many different sectors. If you created a visual map to show who's here that represents interest in different sectors, that creates a cluster that helps us to connect with each other. You could take that down to most of the people here seem interested in collecting the data, not as interested or in sharing the data to make people do something because of what the data shows. So that's a data communication process, which could be another version of the map showing not only who does that, but who does that in which sectors. A third could be who's teaching kids to do that. Again, focused on different sectors. So if any of you are doing that kind of work or interested in talking about that kind of work, just Twitter. Let's talk.
All right.
Yep. I like your idea of letting the data come to you, but sometimes you want to be mobile while you're letting the data come to you.
Okay.
And I really like being mobile at the level of just strolling around. I find that I had a friend who used to, he built all the Park Service Motorola towers.
Yeah.
And he said, I manage by walking around.
That's the HP way, right?
That's not where he came from.
Okay.
But okay, he managed by walking around. And I like to walk around, and I like the visual. And I thought a lady in one of the things yesterday mentioned that in Detroit, I think it was, they just got a bunch of people to go around with their phones and take pictures of homes to do an inventory of what was happening in the neighborhoods. And I do a lot of taking pictures, but it's not really shared or built into anything. And I think we could do more with that. There are some databases that are doing that. They just take a lot of pictures and build them into databases so that you can do that sort of thing. And I look forward to that as part of my project so that I don't have to do Google searches so much. that I can do searches on everybody's data, not something that
Yep.
that ends up getting owned by a corporation.
My background is in research methods, and there's actually a method to that called photo elicitation. And it actually, if you
What?
Google that
Photo elicitation?
photo elicitation,
Photo elicitation.
if you Google that, it'll actually tell you ways to actually report that information, how to group those photos. I did a study at Ohio State where we let students with disabilities walk around campus with their cameras to see where the barriers were for them getting around, and we are able to write that up. So I think that I just jumped on that.
Which is where
That
my
qualitative
project
research
is.
is so important, and it can really put voice to some of the things we're doing.
And just two resources. There's QUANDL, Quandl.
Quandl?
They, to your point about data come to you, it's free. It's a Canadian website. They scrape data from around the world, and as you're putting funder reports and things like that together, it's a absolutely amazing resource.
Can you
and it's
spell
free.
that again?
It's QUANDL, Quandl. It may not be sort of Chicago specific.
Right.
But
Smells
you
like-
benchmarking stuff. If you're trying to say Chicago versus blah blah blah,
Interesting.
it might give you some really cool stuff. And then DAT, DAT is the other.
Yeah, that is a great
That is
project.
amazing.
Yeah.
It's in, Quando is in Spanish and it's a Canadian website?
Quandl.
Quandl, with
QA.
an L. QUANDL.
With an L.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they're free.
Smells like syrup. No, I don't think we have connection.
I'm
Yeah.
tweeting.
There you go.
Nick, you had a
Quandl.
question?
No, just in the same direction. So I have a friend who does international public health. So he has people out in the field in Kenya who are doing like surveys, like way out in the field, like talking about school-based latrines. You use Open Data Kit, which is also open source. It's mobile phone based. It allows you to do form responses. You can control the whole questionnaire using an Excel spreadsheet. Like that's how you do the setup. So it's really low tech. It's open source. It's great for your folks who are out in the field. Just to have like a custom designed data collection.
Well, here we are. Let's eat. Go team. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you. Is this yours?
What was that name of the photo analysis?
That's me. Oh,
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Elicitation.
Thanks, Ian.
Thank you.
Okay, what's it called?
TATL.
Thank you.
AT elicitation. And what, and then
Dan, so you have created every block?
Oh yeah.
That was a very good, I used to always love that
Yeah?
database. Yeah. 'Cause you all stopped it last year,
we're
right?
getting back.
Oh, did you?
Go back.
Okay. Because, I know, like, when I want to look up things on neighborhoods, because I work with YMCA, and I help people that maybe get information about their housing or stuff like that. You all have a lot of good information based on the neighborhoods and the cities.
Yep.
So I'm glad it's back.
Yeah, it's back. Everblog.com. You can go there and you'll be able to see it.
Oh, okay.
Thanks for doing this. Appreciate it.
Thank you. We'll talk about this secondary data source.
Oh, okay. You know what I found out about yesterday that I never knew existed?
Across the entire
Did you look
process.
at yourself?
Globe, that, it's some would say it's ambitious, but I think without that,
Oh, you're from Hawaii.
Can you
I've
really
probably
explain
seen it, but didn't think about it, but like, it's great. I'm a journalist, so if you're trying to source something and you want to get quality information from somebody who's really deeply immersed in the subject,
Oh, no.
that's where to go.
Well, I'm a technical person at the Y, so I'm always looking for partnerships to get into. And so I had connected with Connect Chicago.
Okay.
And then I think through Connect Chicago, I connected with Meetup. And then through Meetup, they connected with them. And then I said,
I missed it.
but I couldn't go justify it at my job and wanted to leave my job, so I couldn't come yesterday. I had to come today.
Yeah.
So, anything the database, I always feel is a good source, and I want to see what they were talking about. Because a lot of times with the Y, use database.
They keep it
database
Your
information
campus
in order to
is
try and get
trying
grants.
in the
and things
access
like that.
department.
And
They're trying.
I had to go use the bathroom one day when I was going down the Blue.
Yeah?
So I was going down between the Blue Line and the bus stop.
Uh-huh.
And I had to go in to use the bathroom. Notice that that's where the, they call it the handicap office is.
yeah.
I call it different abilities. They
Different
call it
abilities, right.
handicap or disability.
Uh-huh.
And so I went in to see what, because there was a lady with a group that I'm working with that had mentioned she wanted access points for the loop.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, I wonder if UIC knows where all their accessible doors are and accessible up and down.
Okay, I bet they do.
Well, I went in and she couldn't pull it up for some reason.
I could have sworn I just saw it on there.
See, there was a map on the wall of the east and west campuses.
Mm-hmm.
And she says, here they are, and I said, and she said it's on the map. But then it wouldn't pull up on her computer when she tried to pull it up.
Oh, yeah. I thought they had it.
There was a link.
Yeah, just for it.
Okay, can
I'm looking at they have a new app that they just came out with.
it might be just kind of interesting if you're interested in seeing the different reports. And I really love your feedback.
Oh, no, UIC's
Trying
app.
to-
Yeah.
This is like a brand new
UIC has an app.
process.
That has a database. And I thought there was something for disabilities.
Oh,
I like
good.
databases.
Yeah.
I like information.
They just
I like
pulled up the map of this.
And I like deciphering it, you know.
So-
One thing I
You look
always
at
say
cameras
about
versus
statistics is that you can use it in different ways. You can use it in a good way or a bad way, or, you know, you
No, I'm
can
not
take
seeing
it,
anything.
say,
I've seen
use it as
ATMs.
a positive for a certain cause.
Mhm. Yeah, probably
Same
Google.
information as a negative.
Let's see, Google. It's a
So I
good
like to look
map.
at.
Yeah, I thought they had something right here.
I
I know that there's an effort, like that project I did was Ohio State got D for the ADA. So they brought me in to just kind of do some research on what they might want
Yeah,
to
it's
ask
all,
for students.
all
So
this
that's
just,
neat.
it's just a
So you published that
simple,
somewhere?
healthy living.
Yes, it's called the Photo Voice Project.
Quiz or
It
like
says published on their
survey, so
website.
like how much
Photo
fruits and
Voice,
vegetables you eat and how
Ohio
active
State
you are.
University.
And you know, for all the kids that
Yeah,
were
it
at
says
summer
it's
camp.
right there.
So we're gonna do it
The
again.
Dean, also Disability Services of Ohio State. It's called the Photo Voice
analyst of our
Project.
team put it together, and she's
Here's
always
my
looking
card.
for
Call me if
feedback
you
on how to
can't
make that
find it.
report better.
Or if
So
I
I'd
forget,
love, I'll
because
send it to you.
I'm depending
and
on
I
the
would love any
videos
of
to
your
be good.
feedback, and especially if you think of like ways to.
One thing about
Yeah.
the database,
This
it
video
depends on the
system.
information we collected, but
Yeah.
they call
The
it
first time it didn't work well, and they had to go back
Because we don't have a database for it. Just all we can do
to
is like
make it
build
better
it
for
and it's-
YouTube.
But think about
And
what
hopefully
information
the videos from
you
this
think
and the voice
you
will
might want to find out about it.
all come out well.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be fun to see.
This is an amazing overview.
Yeah, well, it's good
information
information.
you put in,
Good to see you.
the more
Yes, I am.
I used to work at USC.
more you
All right,
can
good to meet you.
get more information out of your database.
No, well, you know, I just started about.
You may say, okay, fruits and vegetables. You know, you may say fruits and vegetables, but then you may
No,
want to say
no, I hope
what kind of
not.
fruits,
Yeah,
whether
I'm just
they
gonna
were
take a
seasonal
guess.
or what, you know, or
I had this conversation
you know,
via
it's just,
email with Betty
the more you
Bones just
put, you know, the
Uh-huh.
more
2 months ago,
precise
and
you
then I
get
find out
it, the
she's
better it will
already.
be.
Yep.
Yes, I think
She's
so,
back again.
and especially for,
Okay.
sorry, I'm gonna head out, but you should meet
Okay.
Christina
But,
too.
I was pitching the idea, I had software, in CPS to manage behavior issues, and social emotional issues, and all that in CPS. High school years, particularly
Yeah, I
effective.
just,
And I've always thought that, leaning with that level of hand-holding and tracking of behavior, not behavior, but more the social issues with our particular freshmen and undergrads.
Send me that
Because
database.
they're not very different from the high school kids, right? And when I was like the institutional researcher for the College of Ed, and I would track our retention rates, and I would track where our alumni go in the city, whether we're meeting our mission and all that stuff.
It's like the general, like,
Particularly, the last couple of years, we started a new program with freshmen. And this is where we had this incredible shock that, oh my God, we lose so many freshmen. The first semester in particular, and then the second semester. And as we dug into it, just kind of anecdotally why our kids and it's stuff like this. we started to kind of tag, why did they leave? We found, well, we can't just tag it as a financial issue or
Right.
an academic issue, because they're often very related.
Some of it's
Because
also about belonging and feeling connected. And
there's so many things that get tied together.
From
Dad
what, 'cause I was wondering,
loses a job,
and I
the
see
kid's
that it's
stressed out,
basically
grades are failing, the money's
board,
not
and
there,
I-
everything falls apart. So
that says we
my
got
thought
people,
was,
they're getting data, people, they're getting data, people,
because
they're
our
getting data. How can we
advisors
put all this
in
stuff
the
together?
college of these
Right.
are
Some
just
people may
so
have
focused
stuff I'm looking
on
for, so let's get
academic
those
stuff,
people
they're so focused on their
And,
caseload, and they just have
because
huge
at first I
cases. They're
thought,
overwhelmed.
they were looking for my data.
I
to put
felt
in
that
their
there's
information.
probably a
And
better
then,
way
well, I
to,
can't give out
there-
my
there's
information. One, I don't
faculty who are
have it.
interested in these kids, they can't do it alone, they can't take on every kid's problem. The advisors are overwhelmed, they can't take on, problems with their entire caseload. But somehow, between more
So I mean,
communication,
email
this
you
low
all,
level
so you're gonna
stuff,
give me that
Susie,
by
it's
Tuesday,
the
I
third
guess,
day of class, and Susie still doesn't have text
alert
alert
systems, yeah.
right? Somebody gotta figure out, and then somebody talks to Susie and finds out, well, she's got a grant covered in textbook, the grant will have to come in. This kind of stupid stuff. It's totally screwing Susie because she's already failing her class because she doesn't have her text with you. You get the picture.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely. The early alert systems are we're starting to see more of those.
Okay.
In higher ed, I think it's because it's important for us to be able to, and it is to know, a faculty member to say, hey, this student hasn't come to class. Advisor, do you know why? No, advisor, I don't know why. Housing, do you know why they're not here? Are they showing up in their dorm? So it's like it's early and it's still fuzzy, but that's something I think is that.
So I'm wondering how far along is UIC in.
Oh, I don't know if USC has it.
So that was my pitch to Betty Bottoms.
Here.
I have this software that's actually a UIC licensed product that I'd love to grow inside of CPS. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Let me give you my card because I'm starting to work with that student success group that Betty Bottoms was leading. Thank you.
Yeah, my grant dried up at UIC, so I'm on my own.
Oh, well, now you got good ideas, though. So that's good.
Actually, if you need any help with data stuff, if you need hired guns,
Oh, I wish you were. I just hired some people the
Is
other
it?
day. We just hired new analysts.
As a full-time.
Yeah, come on.
And there's a lot of computers around. Yeah.
Hey, are you on lunch? No. It's your lunch break, brother. Lunch break. Lunch break. Okay, brother.
Is this still, we only see the west side? Huh?
Yeah, it's only the west.
What's this, south?
No, that's what we were upstairs. The
No,
west.
this,
That's west. Let's go this way.
Okay.
So this is gonna get all kinds of crazy, this thing.
Well,